Derek Carr had some really interesting comments about his breakup with the Las Vegas Raiders. So on Twitter, I found this tweet. Shout out to Dove. I can't pronounce his full name, but he said, update. Quarterback Derek Carr admits he was very upset and mad at the Raiders for benching him late last season. And I quote in Derek Carr's words, I was, for lack of a better term, I was very upset. I was mad. You spend 9 years in a place, you have all the records, and you can go play at a high level, and for something to get in the way, whether it was whatever reason, money related, or whatever injury related, I would have said, I don't even want the money. I just want to play 2 more times in front of our fans. I didn't get that opportunity, so it definitely lit a fire inside of me to keep going. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Derek Carr's comments on how he felt about getting benched for his last 3 games as a Las Vegas Raiders. And listen, I kind of feel where he's coming from. A good amount of people feel like he's being a little bit over dramatic. Some people feel he's being salty about the situation, but Derek Carr had a lot of love for the Raiders, especially the fan base. And this is definitely somebody who did a lot in the community. This is somebody who spent the majority of his career up to this point with the Raiders. And when you spend so much time with one franchise, you kind of grow a strong attachment to them. And how things ended in Las Vegas for Derek Carr were really ugly. Now, did the Raiders make a mistake benching Derek Carr? I don't really think they did. I feel like it was time. I feel like the relationship between Carr and the Raiders started to sour to the point where they just had to move on. And there's a lot of Derek Carr fans out there that defend this man and say, man, he never had a great defense. He never had stability when it came to the front office and on the coaching staff. And I get all that, but we still have to be honest. Despite all of the instability that Derek Carr has dealt with over the years during his time with the Raiders, he wasn't all that great. People think that he's going to end up becoming the next Matthew Stafford with the New Orleans Saints, and I don't see that happening. Derek Carr and Matthew Stafford were on 2 different levels. When Matthew Stafford was with the Detroit Lions, he was a damn good quarterback. One of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. We just didn't know how good he was because who the hell was watching the Detroit Lions? For Derek Carr, we've seen him in a lot of big games for the Las Vegas Raiders over the years, and his best performances came against the Kansas City Chiefs in 2020. And when you look at Derek Carr, he's a solid quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback. He's a quarterback that needs everything around him to go right. If you don't have all of the right pieces around Derek Carr, he's not good enough to be able to overcompensate for that, such as a guy like Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes was able to overcome not having the greatest group of wide receivers. You also look at Justin Herbert. He was able to get the Chargers to the postseason last year despite having one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL and being without 4 starters on the offensive line. That's what happens when you have an elite quarterback. When you have an elite quarterback, you don't need a perfect team around those guys for them to be successful. Meanwhile, you look at Derek Carr, he needs everything. Great coaching, great team, great defense. You look at Derek Carr, I think he's a really solid QB. I think he's in that Ryan Tannehill kind of tier where you can win with Derek Carr as long as you have a good team around him. But Derek Carr fans make it seem like he was just dealt a completely bad hand during his final season with the Las Vegas Raiders. I get that he had to learn a new system. But Derek Carr, even under the years that he was with John Gruden was frustrated with him at times. It's been well reported. And then you look at how last year went. His final game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was awful. And I'm a Steelers fan. And I'm telling you that the Raiders should have won that game. Derek Carr costed the Las Vegas Raiders that game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I get it's a team sport, but the quarterback position is the most important position in the NFL. They have the biggest influence over the outcome of the game. And when you have your starting quarterback throwing 3 interceptions, and getting outplayed by Kenny Pickett, that's a problem. Derek Carr, the Las Vegas Raiders were right to move on from him. Now, do I agree with who they replaced him with? Absolutely not. Going from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo is a lateral move at best. But I do think that Ryan Tannehill is the kind of tier and kind of quarterback that I compare to Derek Carr. And when you look at Derek Carr, how last season went, he wasn't good at all. I mean, he had a couple of okay games, but he never had any games that made you go, wow, like Derek Carr is one of the best QBs in the game. So for Derek Carr, his recent comments to me, they don't come out as salty or bitter. It just comes out like he's still very hurt about the situation, and understandably so, because he loved the Raiders organization. He loved the fan base. But for the Derek Carr defenders out there that get behind this dude and act like he was everything to the Las Vegas Raiders and that he just carried that franchise on his back and he's this great quarterback that was held back by the organization, I kind of have to disagree with you. Was Derek Carr held back by Las Vegas? In a sense, yes, a little bit, but I don't think that he deserves no blame at all. He wasn't good last year. He's not a great QB. He's a solid QB. And I'm not saying that he can never become a great QB, but up to this point of his career, he's been a serviceable, really good quarterback at best. He's a top 12 QB when he's playing his best football. That's good enough to get you to the postseason as long as you have a great team around him. But that's the problem. Las Vegas hasn't had a good team around Derek Carr, and they didn't have good coaching last year, so that kind of held him back. He wasn't able to overcome that. Derek Carr's comments about the Las Vegas Raiders and how that situation played out is kind of what I expect for somebody who spent pretty much his whole entire career up to this point with one franchise. Of course, there's going to be a little bitterness. There's going to be a lot of hurt. You know, I feel like the Raiders probably could have allowed him to start for the last two games if they really needed him to. But you look at what Jarrett Stidham did in his first season without Derek Carr, and you're like, damn, this dude's lighting up the 49ers and he's a backup. His first game as a starter, he had a better game than anything that Derek Carr put up for the last few weeks up to his benching. Derek Carr's recent comments on the Raiders breakup is what I expect from a player who spent so much time with one franchise. Of course, he's still going to be a little hurt about the situation. I think that this definitely is going to give him a chip on his shoulder going into his first year at the New Orleans Saints. And I think that he's going to do some pretty good things in the NOLA, even though I don't think the Saints are going to be as good as what a lot of people think they will be. I don't think that Derek Carr is going to be any worse than what they've had at QB ever since Drew Brees retired. Jameis Winston had a pretty good stretch when he was with Sean Payton before he went down. But then after that, the Saints have had instability at the QB position ever since. And I think Derek Carr, he's going to give you good quarterback play, but he's not a guy who's going to come through for you in the big moments. Yeah, he has all these fourth quarter comebacks and come from behind victories, but how many of those has he put up in big games that actually mattered? Where was this against the Cincinnati Bengals when they lost to them in the wild card round in 2021? I'm just saying, like, a lot of Derek Carr defenders bring up all these stats and all these numbers and all these fourth quarter comebacks and whatnot, but how many of them has he had in big games when they mattered the most? Where was this against the Pittsburgh Steelers? The defense showed up in that game. They held Pittsburgh to 13 points. I'm just saying, man, Derek Carr, he has a pretty good team around him in New Orleans. You got Chris Olave, Michael Thomas for the few games that he's going to be able to stay healthy. You're going to have a pretty serviceable offensive line. But let's just stop the narrative that Derek Carr just was set up to fail with the Raiders. He carried the Raiders on his back, man. Like, Derek Carr defenders have to be a little bit more real. I'm not saying that the Raiders didn't do a great job surrounding Derek Carr with talent, because they didn't, but let's just stop acting like Derek Carr just carried the Raiders organization on his back and he's this elite QB. He's a solid QB. He's not elite. Derek Carr, his recent comments with the New Orleans Saints don't really get me riled up. They don't really aggravate me like some other Raiders fans say. They get fed up with hearing Derek Carr continue to take shots at their organization. They just want him to move on. But I mean, the dude's hurt, man. He's still trying to heal. Let the man heal. Let him vent about the situation. I have no problem with these comments. This is what I expect from somebody who's still hurt over a situation where he's been for franchise for a very long time and they decided to move on from him.